This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thanks for watching this week's NC Spin. In the next couple of weeks, students in traditional schools will be returning to the classroom. And this week we ask our panel to comment on several hot-button education issues. We also discuss a bill before the legislature that would change the way electric rates are decided. And as always, we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. On this week's panel are Donna Martinez, whom we welcome back after too long a delay. She's with the John Locke Foundation and WPTF Radio. John Hood, syndicated columnist and author. Chris Fitzsimon, director of the Newsroom. And Rob Schofield, the director of NC Policy Watch. We'll begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Let's get to it. It won't be long before school bells ring in a new year, but fewer students will be attending our traditional schools. And we want to ask our panel about the possible resegregating of our schools, a testing controversy and surrounding assessments and other hot-button education issues. Rob Schofield, recently it was revealed that only 80% of K-12 students now attend traditional schools. The number attending charters, privates, and homeschoolers has surged in recent years. Is this a result of the school choice movement?
Well, Tom, this is a big topic. I think we could spend the whole half hour just talking about this topic alone, but there's three quick points I want to make. Number one, I think it's a bad thing. I think public schools are where we come together as a society. Our kids learn to read and write and to think and all of those important things, but it's also where we learn social values. It's where we have social cohesion. It's so critical to our society going forward. Our kids need to learn to live with other people. Number two, school choice movement clearly playing a role in that. I also think the move to resegregate our schools that you alluded to is a big driver of this. And the third point I'll make is that I think it's really being driven first and foremost by our sustained disinvestment in public education. The reason parents are opting out in many instances of sending their kids to traditional schools is because they don't have small class sizes. They don't have the one-on-one attention that they want for their kids. They don't have the textbooks, the materials, all those things that we're underfunding in public schools.
Donna, let's bear down on some of this. We've seen some reports that show that 30% of the charter schools are 80% white. Which is a stark contrast to the majority of traditional schools. Only 14% have that much. And 30% of the students are low income in charters, whereas it's 50-50 in most traditional schools. A lot of people say that part of the reason for this is the fact that charter schools don't have to provide transportation for their students, and they also don't have to provide breakfast and lunch. How big a factor do you think this is in the possible resegregating of schools?
Look, parents are making choices, and in some cases parents are banding together, and so they can carpool, they can do things, and no doubt that every family looks at different things that are important to them and are important to their kids. So I don't think you can just say, well, it's because of this or it's because of that. For me, my view is that what's happening is a story really of hope. It's a story of opportunity. No longer do parents have to just say, well, this is it. And if my son or daughter is doing well, great. But if my son or daughter isn't doing well, I don't have a choice to do something else. So I don't see this as a negative at all. No one's being coerced to do anything. This is about parents finally having more of a say.
But John, the facts are inescapable. We lost 6,500 kids in traditional schools last year.
Who's we exactly?
The traditional schools.
The district schools had a decline in enrollment, much of it because of homeschooling and charter schooling, and a little bit in the private schooling area. I disagree with Rob about his final explanation. I just don't think it comports with reality. These are families that are leaving in the vast majority of cases to schools that have less money than the district schools. They're not leaving because the district schools lack money, because otherwise why would they leave? They're going to private schools that are almost always lower cost, lower revenue, or to charter schools which have lower amounts of money than the district schools. I think it is a choice discussion. I think it is possible that there are some effects in the composition of the enrollment that does have to do with things like transportation. I think that's probably true. But I also think that, for example, charter schools don't have a lower percentage of African American students than district schools do. The real difference is Hispanic students. That's where there's a higher percentage of white students and lower percentage of Hispanic students in charter schools. It's not so much about African American students.
One thing we've left out a little bit is the not just the budget. And remember, we're funding public schools. Rob is right, less per capita than we were before the Great Recession. But we also have been through a period of attack on public schools, government monopoly schools. We give schools an F if they have a lot of poor kids in them automatically. Imagine if you're a kid somewhere in North Carolina and your kid is doing okay in school and you get a big fat F in the mail, or you see, oh my gosh, my kid's school is terrible, when it's actually not, and the kids are improving. There's a lot of mixed messages that have been sent about public education by the folks in charge. And we also, I think, probably have left out another driving force, which is a lot of people are making a lot of money on the privatization of public education. Charter school chains, even though the charters there are nonprofits, they're leasing from for-profit corporations. There's big money in education that the state used to pay for that now private companies are making money off of.
I don't agree that this is anti-public school whatsoever. The traditional public
I didn't say it was
school
anti-public school. I said a
classroom,
lot of people are making money off of it.
if it is not anti-public school to want to give parents choices. So with your example, Chris, what about imagine that you're the parent whose child comes home and isn't doing well for all sorts of reasons. Maybe your child's being bullied. Maybe they have an aptitude that's not being addressed. Maybe they can't do well in a large classroom or a small classroom. Why would a parent not be able to say, look, this is my child. I want the best for that child through choice.
They can't
the
say
only
that. They've
force
always
and
had the choice.
coercion
The
comes
question is,
through no choice.
No, they've always had choice. The question is, should we literally taxpayer money be paid to tell kids that dinosaurs and humans share the earth at the same time? That's a question. Should we be able to do that?
Should follow
so no matter
the
what the parent wants, no matter if they want to tell kids that are things that are absolutely wrong, should taxpayers subsidize a terribly flawed education?
And you're talking primarily about private schools.
Well, we're talking about private schools.
Okay, well, we were talking more about charters. But
should taxpayers subsidize a public classroom
you
that
didn't
isn't
answer my
working?
question first.
Well, you answer mine, too.
Okay, what taxpayers should do is fix the school. And we have elections for school boards, we have public input, we have magnet programs, we have a lot of choice in public schools.
Who are dissatisfied, well, you can always maybe kind of several years from now influence a school board election is a very
instead we'll subsidize.
We've had this discussion in our family, frankly, and opted to go to a private school. By the way, by disclosure, I've got to tell you, I have written a column about that. This week's column on my spin on ncspin.com is about this. Rob, the big thing, though, is that when charter schools were first envisioned, they were supposed to be laboratories of innovation. They were given considerably more leeway than were traditional schools, or as John calls them, district schools, which included things like the academic calendar, teacher work days, curriculum, teacher requirements, class size, things of this nature. My question, and the point I get to in my column is, okay, if that, and the results, by the way, indicate that charters are doing about as well on par with our traditional schools. Shouldn't we give this same flexibility to our district schools, our traditional schools? If it works, let's do it.
If some of those ideas are worth emulating, sure. But
shouldn't we allow the school districts to make those decisions?
Sure, those are things that we definitely can give more freedom to. But that's not what we're seeing. These great ideas that we were supposed to get from the charters are not percolating back to the schools, because the great ideas are things like smaller class sizes, having textbooks for kids, basic stuff that all schools ought to provide. And if we did provide them in the traditional public schools, people wouldn't be opting out. You ask parents why they go to a charter or they go to a voucher school. Oh, well, I want a smaller class size. I want more individualized attention. That's what they'll say.
And not to argue, but results and performance seem to track so far as traditional schools are concerned. Now, I want to switch over to another topic if I can. There's a big controversy that's been going on the last couple of weeks. Superintendent of Public Instruction, Mark Johnson, awarded a contract for North Carolina's K-3 diagnostic reading assessment. Now, he claimed it was because of a recommendation that was made by an advisory committee. Now we're finding out that he didn't follow the advisory committee's choice. Is this hubbub just because people are upset with the firm he chose, or that he misrepresented his action?
I think both. I mean, it's pretty amazing that he would make a representation of something that didn't happen and then try to figure out how to continue to do that. And I think that's why you saw a move in the legislature. Some Democratic senators are saying, let's suspend this for a year. Let's don't make a decision for a year. The company that he chose does not have nearly as good a record dealing with kids with learning disabilities, dyslexia, and other things. I think the superintendent was caught here making a political decision, and now is trying to get back out of it. I don't think we should let him.
Should we void this contract, John?
Well, I'd like to learn a lot more about it. The superintendent's position, as I understand it, is that advisory review was itself tainted by some conflicts of interest.
Yes, but at first he said he was following the advice of the advisory committee.
I think we need to learn more of the details on this.
All right.
And the company now is threatening the teachers who expose this with cease and desist orders. We might want to be careful. We might get one of those on NC Spin if we talk about that
cease
company.
And desist?
Yeah,
and journalists. They've
Would that mean we'd have to duct tape our mouths or something?
We might.
Well, who knows? That could happen. Donna, there's been a lot of turnover in DPI since Mark Johnson has become our state superintendent. And I think a lot of people are questioning, is this because new leadership in and of itself is going to put people in that they feel more comfortable with? Or is it a commentary on Mark Johnson's leadership?
I think that turnover is not necessarily a bad thing. Look, you had leadership at DPI that was pretty consistent for year after year after year. People got comfortable. If people wanted to stay, some people stayed because they believed in the focus, they believed in the leadership. Other people looked at it like, this is my job, I have a career here. But if someone comes in, it happens in any organization, whether it's state government or private enterprise or a nonprofit, you get someone who thinks a little bit differently. Some people react well and rise to the occasion, others don't.
So let me ask you, Rob, the turnover, is this because, as Donna say, new leadership can choose new people, or is it a commentary on Mark Johnson's leadership?
I think it's mostly the latter. We had a story by our reporter Greg Childress at NC Policy Watch, wrote a story about this earlier this week. The numbers are pretty impressive, pretty striking at how many people have transitioned out. A lot of the people just got sick of it. They were disgusted with the situation. They left because they were dedicated educators. And I think some of the people that Johnson has brought in have now left because they're not really educators. They're interested in a political career, which I think might actually be the case with the superintendent himself.
Well, certainly it's something that we should watch as we go forward. Let's move over to the question of testing. We've talked about this. How many years have we talked about testing on NC Spin, John?
Test?
Yeah, that's a test.
I say 3.
Oh, wow. People have complained for years about too many tests being given to our students. And the legislature wanted to reduce the number of tests. Both the Senate and the House passed bills which would do that for elementary, middle, and high schools. But the North Carolina Chamber said, not so fast here. We need more discussion about this and what to reduce. What's your opinion about this testing?
Well, I understand the need and have advocated for a long time the need to change or adapt or in some cases streamline our testing program. I think the Chamber was concerned, I suspect not as much about the high school change, though maybe, but the high school change was to get rid of some tests because we are now administering the ACT to all of our high school students, which is a consistent national standard. I like having consistent, independent national tests.
And being
that's
able
better.
to compare to other states.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, but I think the concern is probably greater in the 3 to 8 grade because what they're doing is taking the end of grade courses and they're replacing them with what is now called, and will be changed its name eventually, but called check-ins, 3 tests a year, and you basically use them together. Now, that sounds odd because if you're talking about too many tests and you add more tests, that sounds confusing. The argument is that a number of districts are already using 3 tests a year plus the end of grade.
Yeah.
And so you would try to use the 3. But I am concerned, I agree with the Chamber, I'm concerned if that instrument is really valid and really helpful because one of the things North Carolina at least has, and I'm questioning the test, but at least we have a long history of giving something like the same test over a long period of time, and that has allowed researchers, not just in North Carolina, but across the country, to evaluate and study education reforms in North Carolina.
And for years and years, I will have to say this, for years and years, the North Carolina Chamber had been an integral partner and player in public education in North Carolina, and for years that kind of disappeared. Gary Salamito, who's interim or acting.
I think they're trying to make sure that whatever changes they might make, because there is some pressure about tests, don't take away information that we need to evaluate not just individual students, which is part of the reason, but also evaluate schools, evaluate ways of teaching, evaluate policy changes at the state or local level. This is important governance material we need.
You've been very polite, waiting for your turn.
Well,
Go
there's
ahead.
a difference between a high-stakes test that the child might actually be held back or punished as a result and feel that intense pressure from a test that is diagnostic, system-wide kind of diagnoses we're trying to do. We've been on this crazy roller coaster when it comes to testing. First, we had to do lots of testing because we wanted more accountability in schools. Now some of the same people who pushed it initially are pushing back the other direction. We've got to find some common ground, but I'll come back to the theme I mentioned earlier, is that if we invested enough in our schools and gave the teachers the tools they need to educate our kids, the testing issue wouldn't be such a controversy.
Look, we should be focusing on growth. You need to, that's why I like the idea of multiple tests during the year, because you're measuring a child's growth. Is that child
From
learning?
start of year.
Yeah, exactly. Are they learning or are they not? And then what aren't they learning? And you can go forward. The entire world is going towards on-demand, more personalized everything. That's where we have to go with education.
Chris, I want to switch over to a topic that you got started on, and I didn't get a chance to follow up on it, but I want to do it. And that is the grading of schools, the subject of that. And again, this is another one of those subjects that we've talked about for years on NC Spin. Basically, the way it works right now is that schools are graded 80% according to the test scores of their students and 20% according to how they grow, as you were talking about. They put them on a 15-point scale, which I'm not sure I totally understand, but have decided to do that. But now there's some thinking that maybe this whole formula needs to be changed, and the legislature, and let me give them some kudos here, rather than making the decision themselves, they tossed it back to Mark Johnson and the State Board of Education and said, you guys talk about it and come to us with some recommendations.
Well, the problem with that is that the Senate leadership has refused to have a conversation about that. The last several sessions, the Republican House leadership, one time in the budget, one time in a bill, has changed the grading formula to be 50% test score, 50% growth, which makes a lot more sense. Some people, John among them, has advocated two separate measurements. So there are Republicans, even Craig Horn, who I disagree with quite a bit on a lot of education issues, has been a proponent of changing this formula. The Senate leadership has refused year after year after year, and we've had all these schools claiming that they're failing when they're actually doing pretty well to help economically disadvantaged kids. The study is better than nothing, but I don't think this is rocket science. We could have already changed it.
It's been a long time since we've talked about education issues, and I make a pledge that we're going to, particularly as school is getting ready to start again, we're going to be doing more of that.
We'll give you a test at the end of the quarter.
Thank you. But a quarterly
and it's going to be 50-50, not 80-20. Okay.
Afraid I was going to get an F there. Let's switch topics. Public utility companies are called regulated monopolies, with regulators allowing rates that provide reasonable returns to their investors while ensuring good service to customers. But we've not seen anything in recent memory as contentious as the arguments over what's now called Senate Bill 559. If it's passed and Governor Cooper signs it, it'll make a major shift in the way rates are going to be established over the next 10 years, giving Duke Energy more leeway in establishing their rates. A major campaign has been waged in opposition to this, urging the governor to veto the bill. Donna, this campaign in opposition to Senate Bill 559, is that the reason it hasn't passed the House?
The reason it hasn't passed the House is because there's no consensus among House leadership about what to do here. This is a really complex bill, complex situation. And so Representative David Lewis, chairman of the House Rules Committee, has signaled his support for this. But there are a lot of people who are saying behind the scenes, what is this really all about? All of these provisions, let's not move too quickly. I see it as really an issue of trying to protect ratepayers, and that's why I like this review every time there's a request. I'm leery of this idea
So you're not, what I hear you saying is you're not crazy about this Senate Bill 559.
I am not crazy about it. I want to protect ratepayers.
It almost seems like it negates the powers of the state utility commission.
But here's the thing. I think Duke has legitimate concerns and questions about what to do with aging infrastructure. And so that's why I say we do have to look at those questions.
Rob,
we do have to pay for it.
The way this works is it's a two-part bill, basically. The first is going to allow Duke or Dominion to be able to sell bonds in the event of another hurricane or storm damage or whatever like that.
That's not controversial.
That's not controversial at all.
Okay.
The second part allows them to ask for successive rate increases over a 5-year period of time instead of going back, as Donna was saying, to the Utilities Commission each time to make the case. what's the problem with this?
Not
Because it
necessarily.
doesn't seem to have a whole lot of constituents.
Well, I think the constituent is Duke. That's who's behind it. There's not necessarily a problem with giving having multiple-year rate cases. The issue it has to do with the criteria that are used for assessing whether they're successful or not. We have an existential climate crisis in our society right now. Duke Energy is, like it or not, at the center of that. They are the huge carbon fuel user. They are sending, plumes of CO2 into our atmosphere. We've got to make it a critical component of that we move swiftly to a renewable energy economy.
You're arguing for rate increases.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because actually, if they, for instance, move to a smart grid system, which actually would reduce the need to produce electricity and send out just as much as needed out onto the grid, we could actually do that.
This smart grid system
exactly what
is
they want.
It's going to cost
That is part of it. That is part
$13
of it.
billion for the smart. I'm not taking their side necessarily,
No.
but 35 states already have some version of this, don't they,
That's
John?
going to happen. There are ways to do this so that all the money doesn't go to the shareholders.
Well, they're
of
all
Duke.
labeled SB 559.
And here's the
too,
other
I'll
thing
say
what is not happening is that the Senate is not confirming Governor Cooper's nominees to the Utilities Commission. We have only 4 of the 7 members on there now are even serving. The commission is greatly depleted. That would be another thing we should do to get this moving.
So far as it goes, this NC Warren, Chris, is the organization that is, huge newspaper ads, television ads, so forth like that. And they're citing the fact that there's been over $1.6 million in campaign contributions that have been given to Senator Berger, Senator Moore, Dan Blue, David Lewis. They say the rates are going to be increased by 50% if this bill passed, and more costs are going to be paid by shareholders than by by ratepayers than shareholders.
2 overriding themes without getting into the weeds. First of all, does anybody think that Duke Power, Duke Energy, Dominion don't have enough influence over rates and don't get their way 95% of the time already in North Carolina? So first of all, what are they screaming about? And the second thing is, why would you do this in this dramatic a fashion without a lengthy, we talked about studying things earlier, why would you not study this, have consumer advocates, have utility experts, have everybody do this in a thoughtful way, then run this through the legislature this way? I think NC Warren is onto something. I don't always necessarily agree with them. I think in this case, we need to not do this year at the very least.
This is really rare. I'm finding that there's consensus on this panel on this issue.
Yeah, I'm with you on the study, but among the everybody has to be an economist. An economist has to sit down. Well, not of course.
every
Sometimes
side
that
will have
doesn't
their
happen.
economist.
So,
No,
John,
but
if this
that's the
passes,
point.
will
it
Cooper
has to be an
veto it?
economist.
I think that the relationship between the governor and Duke is not exactly hunky-dory, so I wouldn't be betting on it if I was on the Duke side. Or maybe he would demand something to get his signature. There's been a history of the governor holding things up until Duke gives him what he wants.
All right. Let's turn around to the part of the program where we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Chris?
For years and years and years, the Republicans and many people on this panel complained about pork barrel spending and local projects getting money when Democrats were in power. WRAL released a database this week. Almost $400 million worth of single-directed local projects are really pork barrel. Ironically, that's roughly the same amount of money it would cost North Carolina for its share of Medicaid expansion. We have a budget that is chocked full of pork barrel. I haven't heard any conservatives or Republicans say a word about it. That was one of their defining issues when they were not in power.
I'll have to go look that up because I somehow or another that escaped me. Rob Schofield, tell us something we don't know.
One of the biggest stories we had on NC Policy Watch this week was the fact that there is a move afoot in Congress to rename Lejeune High School on the campus of Camp Lejeune to make it Walter Jones High School. It has produced a firestorm of opposition. We have gotten tens of thousands of shares of the story on our website, dozens, scores of negative comments. I don't think it's going to happen.
Wow. Donna, Martinez, tell us something we don't know.
Social media influencers. So we all know what they are, and we think of them in terms of fashion and entertainment. But there's a growing trend in social media influencers of young farmers across this country. They have YouTube channels where they have tens and hundreds of thousands of followers, and they are helping people understand not only where food comes from, but about the industry, about love of the land, about self-reliance and all that. I hope that trend comes to North Carolina. We need that.
John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
An individual from Texas named Pico visited North Carolina's Outer Banks.
Is this another emu?
No, it is not.
Okay, all right.
And last year, Pico visited New York, but kept his domicile in Texas. He is a 7.5-foot Mako shark. And I believe that Pico is visiting these other states, but he's going to keep his domicile in Texas because it has no income tax.
There you go.
I hope so.
You know, folks, John, last
He's kind
week.
of a loaned shark, if you think about it, because he's loading.
Oh, this
So-
is just getting, this is really getting worse.
Oh, well.
Well, I just got to tell you, this is a big birthday weekend for some of the NC Spin family. Former House Speaker Joe Mavretic is celebrating a birthday. Former Senator Howard Lee, former head of the Department of Education, and yours truly. So, birthdays, greetings. We're all in the signs of Leo here. Anyway. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And next week, we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.